So as I mentioned in the email, this will be kind of an interactive thing. We'll kind of go through some examples together and get an idea of kind of how React works. Hopefully you'll leave here with the ability to go out and build some React apps. So if you start off by opening example1.jsx in your editor, and you can click example1,
I got a bug.
React brown bag. That's good. All right. So, React is a component-based library, so you build up views based on components, where a component is this idea of a loosely coupled but highly cohesive unit for describing a view. When you want to create a component, you use this called react.createClass that creates a description of a component. So every React component needs to render something. Does anyone want to guess the name of the method that we need to implement?
Render.
Oh my god, that's amazing. So create a render property, which is a function. So in React, the render function is used to describe what you want the DOM to look like at any point in time. So for this simple example, we will just render a div. React gives you factories for creating HTML-based components on react.dom. So we'll start by returning something on react.dom, capital DOM. Anyone want to guess what the method is for a div?
Div.
That's crazy. Alright, so we'll get to arguments in a second, but for now I'll tell you that the first argument should be null, the second one can be some text. We'll do hello world, because it's fairly traditional. Avery is cool. So if you save your file and refresh your browser, you should see a div with the thing. Congratulations, you made a React app. So thanks for coming. If you guys have any questions? No, I'm just kidding.
Can I add it to my resume now?
There you go. Perfect. So one of the things you'll notice is we told the component in the JavaScript code what the DOM should look like. So React doesn't use templates like you would see. It's like we use handlebar templates in Marionette. Does anyone want to take any guess as to why it does not use templates?
Larger re-rendering. You can't do as much obvious re-rendering on the small elements.
Mm-hmm.
It has its own engine for figuring out which elements need to be re-rendered when. So if you give it a whole template, it would inhibit that ability.
That's true, I guess.
Templates aren't semantic, they're just strings.
That's a good one. So these are all true stories, and they all kind of come into play about React's philosophy on how it renders views. The big philosophy that gets pushed by the React dev team is that we always put templates somewhere else. We say that we're separating concerns, but they argue that the context in which a template string is rendered and the template itself is so highly coupled that it's not actually a separation of concerns. We're only separating technologies. So they've opted to bring that data into the component, make it more cohesive, bring that data together, make it more obvious what you're doing.
Sorry, there's one
Go ahead.
example of that control statements and templates, like if statements, for example.
That can be to an extent. The bigger one is like, so we use a lot of partials and that sort of stuff, and they're not really as reusable as we say they are, because the variables that you use in the templates depend so much on the context in which they were rendered.
Like when was the last time I made a bunch of backbone views and a bunch of backbone templates and freely reused them with each
Right.
other?
Yeah.
Right.
There.
So the first argument to any of these DOM constructors is a list of properties. The second one is the contents, as we've seen in the Hello World example. So if we wanted to add a class to this div to make it a different color, the class name is ex1success, what do you think we would do to this code?
Are we guessing how you're going to spell the word class? You would add
That's a
an
hard
object,
problem with computer science.
dictionary object.
Right here? Oops, not that.
Yeah, and give it like class of ex1 whatever.
All right.
That's what you're saying, like those are HTML attributes?
Yes. So these are properties that are being passed to the component. We'll talk about this more in detail in a moment, but for now, let's take a look at what we did. And the answer is absolutely nothing. If we look at the DOM, we can see that, in fact, we have no class on here.
Oh.
And also, if you look in your console, we've got a warning that says unknown DOM property class. Did you mean class name?
We probably did.
So helpful.
We might have. And the reason is class is a reserved word in JavaScript. The other thing to note is that properties on components don't always map one-on-one to the properties, the attributes that you'll see on the HTML. So these can actually affect the logic of the component. So class name could actually provide additional capabilities beyond just providing a string of class names that you want to show up on the DOM. So we change it to class name, refresh again, and it's nice and blue. You can see in the DOM that it's taken that class name property and it has changed that to a class attribute on the HTML. So the big point being that the properties that you pass to a component will not always map one-to-one to attributes that you see on the DOM. So as the last exercise here, how would we add a sub-element to this? So instead of having the text hello world, maybe we have a strong tag that has the word hello world in it.
Can we just repeat the same pattern for where hello world becomes react.dom.strong?
Right here. Like that.
Yeah.
So we got, there we go. Perfect. So in this example, we have two components. So we've created a component called application, and then we've taken two other components, one called react.dom.div and one called react.dom.strong, and we've composed them. And this is really what React is all about, is taking very reusable components and building complex UIs by composing them. You also notice that this is 100% JavaScript. We didn't write any strings, we didn't do any CSS or anything like that. It's a little verbose, but we will take care of that in just a second. Is that what you were going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, this seems really overwhelming as soon as you get beyond just one div.
Perfect. So we finished up the first exercise. Does anyone have any questions about what we've talked about so far? All right.
Well, I have a
Okay,
question. Will we get into what factories are?
We may talk about it a little bit later. This is kind of an implementation detail in the latest version of React, and we will basically not care at all about that for the remainder of the day.
So we can think of that as like boilerplate.
You can think about this as boilerplate. When we take care of the verboseness, we'll also take care of the need to create factories. We'll never think about that again.
And React can render inside of any native DOM element.
Yes, I didn't talk about lines 13 through 16. So React.render takes an instance of a component, which in this case is created by the factory that we created on line 11. And then we tell it where to put that component by giving it a DOM node to render into. It will clobber the contents of that DOM node, and then from that point on, it manages the life cycle of the actual DOM. And we'll talk more about life cycle later as well. Cool? Mm-hmm. All right, let's take a look at example 2 at JSX.
There's an error.
There is an error. It's the same error as last time. Almost, actually. So I've created the render method for us in here to begin with. React ships with a feature called JSX. JSX is an optional source-level transform that allows you to express components in a syntax that looks very much like HTML or XML. It makes composing components easier because you don't have to have all these parentheses with nested calls in there. It also makes instantiating components easier because they're not function calls. And I find it helps to lower the cognitive overhead between switching between looking at the DOM that you're trying to make it look a certain way and looking at the code that you're editing. So there's a lot less context switching going on there. It's important to note that it is actually still calling those JavaScript functions under the hood. It just looks different for the programmer. So given that it looks like HTML, how do you guys think we would render the div like we did last time?
Div as an HTML.
Like that?
That's what I would guess.
It's important to restrain any feelings of angst at this point.
Because I'm like, holy crap.
Yeah.
Be open-minded.
Yeah, that's a syntax error.
JS Hint is not like this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mine
Yes,
doesn't
that took a
either.
while.
Yeah, it's like really upsetting my CDO.
What about the syntax error on line 4?
Yeah, I'm a little bit curious about what line 4 is.
We will talk about that in just a moment.
Oh,
Before that, we will refresh exercise 2, and we will see that we have the hello world just as we did before.
Ugh, so crazy.
So,
it's just
again, given that this is supposed to look like HTML or HTML, how do you think we would add the class name back that we had last time?
Class.
Class?
Snake.
We're at.
Class or class name?
Oh, I gotta say class.
It's
Right.
a class name.
It's gotta be
Line
class.
5.
line
There's
five.
class name, that's just nothing. Yeah,
Right
it's
here?
like HTML.
Also, FYI, there is a React.js plugin for Sublime.
Yes,
just
I
got
should
the
have. I
pass.
should have. I didn't think, guys. I should have sent that out. My
Alright.
apologies.
I will.
EX1 successor, EX2.
Yes.
I'll tell you this, but I'm gonna be right because all I've ever React before.
All right, refresh the page, and it's not blue.
Oh, damn it.
So then we get the same.
I didn't know what you were saying. You were right.
we
I
get
didn't know
the
what you were talking about.
Same
until-
warning in our console.
Wait, what were we doing again? That's right.
So one of the things I mentioned when we started this exercise is it is literally calling the exact same methods as we called last time under the hood. So you'll use all the same property names, you'll use all the same lowercase characters for all your React.dom whatever calls.
I fell
So-
for it though.
So we
You set
do want
me
to
up and
change
I
this to
fell.
class name.
So it looks like HTML, except
But
it's all different.
It's,
But
except
it's
it's all different.
classes
sneaky.
different.
Sneaky
Cool.
HTML.
And next week on Snark Team. How about the strong that we had last time?
You're in the wrong room. You didn't know that's on HipChat.
Oh wow, you
Sure,
yeah, correct.
accident.
Well,
Yeah.
Oops.
I hope they enjoy one of your yeah.
That's not gonna solve our problems.
All right, how would we add the strong tag back, or the strong elements, the nested strong? you think?
Just put it in there.
Right
It's
here?
like HTML.
Yeah, the way that we would it in real life.
Real life.
Except instead of a strong tag, you use a B.
Nope, that's exactly right. So in one line of code, we've implemented all the same stuff we implemented last time.
It is a lot better this way.
Which is a lot better, yes. So you will often build very small components. We'll get into composition soon, and then put them together using this XML style syntax.
I noticed the same syntax on line 10 as well.
Yes, that's correct. So this application is a composite component because we've defined it. It's not an actual HTML tag, and you can instantiate those exactly the same way. So it's an XML looking tag with our capital A application. So React will treat anything with a capital letter as a custom component you've defined, and anything with a lowercase letter as an actual HTML tag.
Which
So it
means you'll try to
supports
call it on React.dom.
React.dom, yeah. I think. Yeah. So it works with SVGs and like all the basic tags.
When does JSX turn into JS? During the compilation phase, or
Yeah.
in the
So
browser?
there's something called the JSX transformer that takes the source code and translates it into a it's basically, like I said, a source level transformation. So it literally rewrites this as function calls. They happen on the same line, so you preserve line numbers and all that kind of stuff. On Picasso, we've got that built into require.js. So in development, that happens in the browser, and on compilation, it does it as part of the bundle.
Mhm.
And then the Webpack stuff that recently got added to school also does it on the compile stuff.
Cool.
So here right now, npm is the one that's doing that work.
Yeah, this is actually running Webpack as part of the server, and so it does the transform. Someone asked about the call on line 4, the render parentheses open brace, which probably looks a little strange. Part of the thing that JSX gives you is optional ES6 transformations. So ES6 basically finalized. There's a lot of stuff that everyone is pretty sure is going to be in there. One of them is this syntax, which is known as concise method definition. So instead of saying, colon function arg, you can just say, yeah, exactly.
And that's only in the context of an object literal, or is that?
It's in the context of an object literal or a class, like an actual class.
I see.
Cool. All right. Any
so
questions?
we
Sorry.
don't have to use ES6 stuff to use JSX.
That is correct.
We have the option to.
It is enabled
Which
for schools.
I think in
but-
example one we used our regular
Exactly.
format of render to make us more
Yeah.
comfortable.
Picasso is not using ES6 transforms. Schools is at the time.
What if I wanted to render? What if I wanted to split that up? Like if it was a really long line and I wanted to split it up.
So you've got a couple options here, and people are, as usual, kind of divided on how they like to do it. Some people will do something like this, and, like try to line all this up to make it look, kind of like more like HTML. One of the things I will usually do for a longer one is something more like this. Sorry, I'm learning how to Vim apparently. So usually the first thing I'll do when I define render is return that, and then whatever goes in here. You can structure a little bit better.
So if you didn't have the open and close paren, would it yell at you?
It would yell at you. Unfortunately, this is not valid JavaScript,
Got it.
which kind of sucks. Thanks, JavaScript.
Well, it would be
Yeah,
entitled JSX. Right?
Yeah,
Is
it's
it-
actually valid JavaScript. You can't have return and then let you return on your line.
It's
It's
valid,
valid,
but
it
it
just
do the
wouldn't
wrong
work.
thing.
Oh, that would do the wrong. It would return undefined. That's true. Yeah, you're right. It would just do the wrong thing.
So did I catch you correctly that now the tag names are case sensitive?
So the
div
first letter-
has to be lowercase.
Yeah, the first letter. If the first letter in the tag name is lowercase, React will assume that you're doing an HTML tag. So if I typed application, it would call react.dom.application, which isn't a thing. If I wanted to render application, I would need to define it as an uppercase A and then also instantiate it as an uppercase
I got that. I mean, that seems like less of an issue than the div tag has to be all lower, or has to be lower.
Right.
Just in the, it looks like HTML, except
It's actually JavaScript.
One thing that I just noticed,
Mhm.
I purposely introduced a typo by calling div something else, and the error came out in the
Yeah,
terminal
so
console.
if
It's
you
nice.
introduce a syntax error that Webpack can't compile, it will yell at you on the console. If it's a runtime error, you'll see it in the browser console. In a production-like system, we would unify this to make it a little bit nicer. I just didn't bother to go through all that work for this example. So. Cool. Any questions?
One disadvantage of that is as soon as the error happens, it chokes. I have to kill it and restart it.
It will. If you fix it, it will recompile. Should.
Okay, well, you can
We can
look
look it
I'll
up.
figure that out.
All right. So we've learned the basics. So let's look at example 3, and let's actually build something potentially useful. And now we'll continue trying to learn how to type. So we've already talked that the basis around creating user interfaces with React is around composition. So let's actually compose some stuff. Very common in a React application to have a large number of very reusable components, such as color pickers, avatar widgets, things like that take various properties and will change their behavior, and then a set of like application-specific components that contain, your particular composition and view logic for handling that. We saw earlier that we were able to pass data to the div component by giving it a property called class name. Our custom components can also take properties, and we can do stuff with that. So we're going to start. In this exercise, we're going to render a gravatar, which is an avatar. If you're not familiar with gravitars, it's an avatar that you can get via your email address. I think Ari might have heard of it before. So if we want to compose gravatars in our application HTML, how would we go about doing that? Right?
When you say compose, we could return a new gravatar object instead of just the primitive.
Exactly. So we want to put it in the div because we're going to add other stuff as well.
Ah, I see. Right. Okay, so we would just do a new gravatar?
Almost.
Less than capital gravatar, greater than.
Ah,
Slash.
Perfect.
That makes sense as well.
Mm,
It's cute.
so crazy.
This is cool though. This is what HTML should have been at the beginning, where you can define custom components.
Right,
It's
yeah.
like the
So
XML namespace stuff.
XHTML is supposed to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Alright.
Exactly.
How do you think we would give an email address to the gravatar component that we just instantiated?
Maybe give it an email attribute.
All right. Please feel free to use.
Open up an SMTP connection.
Perfect. So I'll use my email address, and I'll have a Gravatar at that address. If you don't have a Gravatar, feel free to.
Oh, this will actually
whatever.
really use Gravatar. That's cool.
All right. So we've created an application component. It uses the Gravatar. The Gravatar doesn't currently render anything. So let's change that. So in render, what we want to return is an image with the URL pointing to whatever the Gravatar URL is for our email address. So you guys probably guessed by now that we'll return an image, just like normal. But what will the source attribute of our image be, do you think?
Not a string.
Not a string.
So
The
render
result
takes
of
an
our
argument.
Gravatar thing that we're requiring.
What's that, Art?
Oh, I was gonna say, do you pass an email with an argument to render?
Yeah.
Or is
How
it
do you get
on
email?
this?
You got it.
What was it?
You're close, but the property that we sent in via email is actually available to us on our component instance.
Right. So we in line 16 created a Gravatar and
Right.
we passed an email attribute, which is
Exactly.
accessible as this dot.
Yeah. This dot something. So two things. One, if your attribute values can be JavaScript expressions, instead of quotes, use open brace. And to Nick's point, the properties that come into your component are available on this.props.
Well, props to that.
But I'm glad you
Did you
had
just
that
do that
right.
to yourself?
Some people remap their control key to be like, sorry, their font to be control other people.
All right, so which property do we want on here?
Email.
Email. All right.
Well, that'll be a little bit.
Well, that's
Right,
not
because
gonna
That
work. Right.
will be a little bit not right.
We probably want to use this thing that we're requiring.
We
Can we
do
do
want
some
to use
work
that
beforehand?
thing. Let's do some work beforehand.
Okay, let's do some work.
So let's have our URL. So I've imported the Gravatar npm package. It has a method called. Oh man, I hope it's called URL because that's what I think it's called.
It's called URL.
Perfect. And so the URL takes an email address, so we'll just pass in our this.props.email. And then what next?
I've changed this to props.email on line 8 to URL.
Perfect. All right.
Pretty good.
Let's hit up our browser.
Whoa.
Hey, who is that good-looking gentleman?
What a bots.
You ready to get that? Your proper column undefined. What do you got? You have a error on your console.
It's missing a trailing slash, the self-closing image tag.
Yep. Good job, man. That was amazing.
I just learned that.
Perfect. Yeah, that is something I didn't mention. This is an XML-like syntax in that if you have a self-closing tag, it does need a slash it before the greater than sign.
So how does... Okay. Yeah.
Maybe Nick is right and I didn't mess this. Oh, sorry. Image. You actually want IMG. Yeah.
So what I
It's in
got
there.
is
You're inventing your own tags over there, Avery.
Is
Hey,
it
it's
still
Avery.
running?
Garvatar. I think Garvatar is down. Try Gravatar.
Everyone finding their minor syntax errors. Perfect.
So just as a complete side note, how
Sure.
is it actually getting, like, what does the Gravatar package do to convert that email to an
MD5 hash.
Ah,
That's how Gravatar works.
well, I
MD5
learned at least
hash.
one thing today.
Perfect. All right, so now we have this Gravatar component.
Where did the Gravatar? Where'd that come from? That line too?
That is an npm package. So I've got Webpack set up to search for packages through our node modules. So you do npm install Gravatar, and then you can require it just like normal.
So you can see it in package.json.
Yeah, you can open it up. That's fine.
Cool. So now we have this Gravatar component, which is very self-contained, very reusable. I'll put Jason if you don't mind if
Oh, this is gonna be embarrassing.
I wonder who this is gonna be. All right.
Yeah, it's a nice photo.
Suspenders. It's just about to get married.
Ah, nice.
Is that why you was happy? Yep.
Wow.
Getting ready.
I was wondering.
Cool. So here's a question. I tell you, David, I've got some Gravatar component you can use. How the hell are you supposed to know what you're supposed to pass?
Well, I would want to, like a function, I would want to know what arguments or props it takes.
Perfect. So React gives you the ability to do this. So your component can take a property called prop types. Prop types is an object of key value pairs where the key is the name of the property, so in our case email, and the value is the kind of property that you expect. Yep, exactly. So this is all documented in the React docs, which I'll send around after the session. But we want react.capital_prop_types.string, and any property can be marked required by adding is required. Like that.
So if we didn't have this line here, if we commented all this out, and then we didn't pass it. Oh no, sorry. If we did have this line here, and then we get rid of the email part,
Yep,
then we're
perfect.
gonna have a problem.
Yep. So now if you run that, you'll see on your console it says warning, required prop email was not specified in Gravatar. Check the render method of application. So in this way you get a little bit of a formalization of the property types that your component takes. You can build custom ones. What's up? Oh yeah, sorry about
I
that.
was copying and pasting in manual terms.
Oops.
So it's like a submission of type safety.
A smidgen of type safety, yeah. You can tell it that you expect an object with certain properties, called a shape. You can tell it you expect numbers or booleans or a function or whatever. And like I said, you can define custom ones. So if you want to say like it has to match this weird regex and also be at least 3 characters long or whatever, you can build that out.
I guess I'll
Yeah, so the thing, maybe
Wait, so I took-
but it must return exactly
Took this
one
line out,
Mm-hmm.
and then Gravatar just gave me a different.
I see.
Just gave me the standard email.
The thing I always do is write my component in a div called the same thing as the class name, so it's easy to
When you comment it out, prop
but
type.
that always just like kind of enforces that.
So the Gravatar will take
No,
null
so I
and
have like
right.
is required for email.
Mhm.
So then why isn't it throwing me an error?
What do you have in your hidden message here? There it is.
It's got a warning.
So-
Why? Yeah. Why
Got
is it
it.
warning and not an error?
Good question.
Just to not break. Just
I would
these errors
I
are
would
so
assume that
expensive.
it's yeah. As a matter of fact, when you're running in the production build of React, you won't see those at all. So this is a development mode feature.
Okay.
It's kind of designed to make your life easier, but not prevent you from actually building stuff. Any other questions? All right, let's move on to our next to last exercise, exercise 4.
Ooh,
All right.
buttons.
Buttons. So we've talked about past properties, which are passed to components from their parents. But components also have a piece of data called state, and components own their own state. They're allowed to modify their state. They're not allowed to modify their parents. Are you good or
I'm still a step before you.
what's up?
So the question.
I think you have to do something like that, but it's a good question.
Okay, so the question is, if you have something like URL, which we're putting in the curly braces to
Mhm.
put in, if that's a part of the string and you have some other part of the string that you want to add to it, you can't seem to put it outside or inside there
You have to do plus and then that's string.
Yeah.
as a like that.
So yeah,
inside of
the curly brace would be a JavaScript expression. So anything in
Ah,
JavaScript that
okay.
returns a value, you can put in curly braces. So not if statements, but you can do ternary statements. Corrections. Ternary.
Can you take that string outside of the evaluation and not use a plus symbol?
You mean like there's like something like that or something? Yeah.
Without the plus.
No way to really do this. No. You would either want to put it inside the brace, or you want to,
So it's not just doing like simple find and replace.
That's correct.
It's
Yes.
doing like more.
Like you couldn't put a question mark and then URL.
Yeah. So this turns into react.dom.image src::URL, where this turns into this.
Yeah.
Yep. So if you did, you know, quote A,
No.
So we're waiting for that to come back on. Are there any more questions about this exercise? If not, we can move on to the next one and start kind of talking about that one. All right. So I'll say again what I was saying a minute ago. We talked about props. Props come to you from your parent. State is something that your component owns, and it has the ability to change it through certain APIs. So we've decided that we want to get in on the cash cow that is Cookie Clicker. So we're gonna build a Cookie Clicker clone. Yeah, so I figured Jason would be excited about that.
Okay, so I got one more question.
Oh yeah, what's up?
So how is the file structure names map to the URL structure?
You mean the names
So-
of the JSX?
Yeah, so like we're EX4 JSX, but it's going into exercises 4.
There's an Express server that does /exercises/ whatever, and then loads the right JavaScript file.
Got it. Yep, that's
Kind
it.
of like Sinatra, right?
Yeah, very Sinatra.
So that's the index.js.
Yeah.
And all of that is separate from React. That's like an arbitrary server you chose to host
Yeah,
these things.
correct.
I see.
All right, so exercise 4, we have a button. It says click me. When you click it, absolutely nothing happens. So we should make it do something. So we'll start by implementing one of React's lifecycle hooks. So React gives you a lot of lifecycle hooks, again, documented well in their documentation, to allow you to plug into different parts of the lifecycle of the component. We're going to use one called getInitialState, with each letter capitalized. Don't forget the comma after the brace. And getInitialState, well, what do you think getInitialState does?
Let me guess. It gets the
It's the state at
State
the end, right?
at the
That's-
initial
So close.
moment.
But
So-
I thought we passed state in through attributes.
Props is what comes in through attributes. Props are immutable. You don't want to really touch them. They belong to whoever
Oh.
let you see them. State is what belongs to you. So props are on this dot props. State is on this dot state. The return value of getInitialState is the initial value of this dot state. Together, this dot props and this dot state should ideally be all the data that you need for your render function to work. It makes React very predictable. You know that that's a pure functional function of those two pieces of data, and that's the only two things that could change to make your render do something different. So we're building a Cookie Clicker clone. That's really hard to say. What kind of state do you guys think we should keep track of?
Number of cookies.
Number of cookies.
I don't even know what a cookie clicker is.
You never seen Cookie Clicker? So Cookie Clicker is a game where you click on a cookie and you get a point. End of game. And you keep clicking the cookie and you keep getting points.
I thought
Oh,
it
so
was.
that's like
This
Cow
is,
Clicker.
this is like
It's
right up
probably-
Jason's alley.
The number of cookies that Lindsay has is in like 12 digits.
No way.
So the
That's
thing that's really
scripted.
left out is that you can purchase add-ons that give you additional automatic cookies
We're in the-
using in-game points.
We're not going to build that.
It's like a real-time strategy game.
Is
Moving
it,
along.
is it multiplayer as well?
No.
That would be even better.
But you can also use set interval to help you out.
All right, so we've got a state. We have number of cookies of 0. Does someone want to help me get this into our display? So we've got clicks down here. We want to display the number of clicks that we currently have.
You did,
Thoughts?
Dot state. Dot
yeah, you did
clicks.
say this stuff state.
No, number of cookies. Sorry.
Like that.
Well, you're missing one thing.
What's that?
The curly brace.
Perfect. There you go. So just like the properties, curly braces interpolate JavaScript expressions into your DOM. So with that change, if we refresh our exercise 4, we will see that we have 0 clicks, and no matter how furiously we click me, we still have 0.
So we don't have any events.
We have no events. Avery, how do you think that we would watch for events on our button?
Events?
That's the word.
That's
Use register an event handler with jQuery.
Exactly. Perfect. So this will look familiar to anyone who did JavaScript programming in the 90s. We're going to add an on-click handler.
Oh, nice.
to our
Yes.
button.
well.
Getting back to the good old
Yes.
roots.
So can anyone tell me why this is considered a bad practice in JavaScript most of the time?
Well, it's only one. It's
Yeah, it's not
incompatible, but
reusable.
most of the time you can't add more buttons.
And
You're
Yeah, 'cause,
basically
like, you
clicking
would add a whole
down.
bunch of buttons all in the
Basically, people
same
try to
class.
override
Yeah.
the on-click event
Yep.
and steal
Yep.
somebody else.
All good answer. Another good one is it's global, application wide. In React, it's all local to your component.
Mm-hmm.
So we are going to define an on-click handler. We're going to pass it a reference to a function we're going to write called this dot whatever you want, handle click, or click cookie, or whatever.
This dot get points.
Now that function is on the application, not on the separate component, right? So if we wanted to do this a little bit maybe nicer, we would maybe make a separate component aside from application.
You're good.
Sorry.
Okay.
Reading example 5.
Yeah, stop it.
No, I
Stop reading it.
promise I'm not.
All right, so
I'm just
after the render method, don't forget to add a comma, and let's implement handle click as a function. So one of the things you don't have to worry about in React is the value of this inside your methods. React takes care of that for you. Any top-level method you define in your component will automatically be bound to this as the component when it gets called.
Wait, React takes care of that or this?
Yes, that's correct.
Sorry, wait for it.
All right. So anyone want to guess what we
I'll do
need
that
to
next
do in Avery? What don't we want to do in handle click?
You don't want to just add 1 to the number of cookies.
That's right.
Or it's like just something that.
So if we
yeah.
do this does state the number of cookies plus equals 1 or plus plus or whatever you like, and then we click, absolutely
That doesn't
nothing
work.
happens
I already
at
tried
all.
it.
You gotta call render again.
Exactly. Why do we need a color render again?
Because otherwise it thinks that maybe you just want to add 1 to the thing and not update.
Yep. Yeah, that is true. The main reason is it has no way of knowing that a value changed, right? This is JavaScript. We don't have a whole lot of nice ways of setters and getters. They're coming, but
They're all
React has
like
no
observers and
right,
stuff.
yeah. But React has no way of knowing something changed.
Just tell it to trigger another digest cycle.
Yeah, jeez. Just get out. So React provides a couple of APIs for you to update your state. And it's important to remember that you should always use these API calls to update your state. You should never update your state directly because those changes will get lost and lead to really confusing bugs where you want to punch your neighbor in the face. So the one we're going to use is called this.setState, which takes an object. State, thank you. SetState takes an object where the keys are the state keys you want to update. So in our case, number of cookies, and then the value. Anyone guess here?
Number of cookies plus 1?
This dot state.
Just,
There you go.
Oh, I missed the this dot state.
Me too, and I got man cookies.
It almost sounds better.
Oh man, look at all those cookies.
Oh man. What are those HTTP?
Don't you let
You're in another problem.
quota
Do you have
per day?
something in the console screen?
I feel like
I think I got it right? Seems to be working good.
Nice.
I'm winning.
Plus math.infinity. Sorry, on your actual terminal console.
That's what.
That's
Like
right.
I'm
I do
learning
that all the
programming
time.
again. This is great.
All right.
31, 32, 33.
All right. So the rest of the session, we're gonna click our button. So that's it. That's how you handle events. Our button has a non-click. We'll look at more events in a bit, but pretty much the entire event system is implemented in React. One of the things that is interesting to note is because React uses a virtual DOM under the hood, so rather than just modifying the DOM every time something changes, it will build up this giant representation of what you want your DOM to look like. It will compare that with what it looked like the last time it did that, and it will figure out what changed, and then it will do the minimal number of DOM mutations in order to make that change. And that's how React does this re-render everything style approach while still being performant. So in order to do that, it has basically implemented the actual event spec to spec, which means you don't have to worry about cross-browser issues synthetically. So it attaches all the click handlers in the very top level element. It handles all the event delegation for you. You use it just like this with the on-click handlers or on-submit on a form or on-change for an input or something like that, and it handles all that stuff in the background for you.
And you still have bubble and capture, right?
You still have bubbling, you still have stop propagation, you still have prevent default, so all that stuff.
Yeah, and I wouldn't expect them to see an on-click handler on the actual button.
That's correct. Yeah, if you looked in the DOM, you would not see a click handler.
That's good.
However,
Interesting
if you installed the React Chrome tools
I
and you
did.
look at the button, you can see that there is an on-click event listener,
That's so cool.
Oh wow.
which is hidden behind this thing.
What's the argument to onclick?
What is the argument on-click?
It's the event,
Shit,
right?
yeah. It's the original event object,
Yeah.
right? With current target and
Yeah.
with that on it.
So if we look at the argument to handle click, it'll be the synthetic event that I gotta click it. That so you see it's the synthetic mouse event. If you need it, you can get access to the native event via the native event property. One other thing that is worth noting is that synthetic events are pooled. So in order to help conserve memory, it will grab an event instance out of the pool, stuff it full of all the properties you need, dispatch it, and then erase them all, put it back in the pool. What that means is if you look at the synthetic mouse event, all the properties are null.
So
Because
if you
it's
held a
already back
reference
in
to
the
that-
pool.
Yeah, so if you held a reference to it like I did, then you'll notice this is all null. There is an API call that you can call in the event that I have forgotten, but I will send it out after the fact, that tells it basically don't recycle this into the pool. You can also console log like the individual things you care about.
When would it be useful not to recycle?
Development.
When you want in development, when you want to see it like this, and you're like, why are they all null? That's not useful at all. Because it's not useful at all.
Is there just like a global flag at development level where I can just be like, hey, don't
Debug
recycle events?
I'm not
please?
aware of one.
If I wanted to programmatically write a certain event handler, so instead of typing on click declaratively, if I wanted to do that later, is there a way to do that? Should I not be thinking that way?
Yeah, you're correct that you don't want to be thinking that way, and the reason is you want to describe how your DOM looks and behaves at any point in time. So you want to kind of get out of the mindset of like at a certain time I'm going to. So the idea is to get out of the mindset of when something happens I'm going to mutate my application and into the mindset of I'm going to describe what should happen at any point in time. So for example, you could return a different component without the click handler, or you could return a component with a click handler that conditionally does something, but invert that logic so it's declarative rather than imperative. That make sense?
Is there any way to re-render without changing state or something?
So
I mean, maybe there's not a need for that.
So if a couple answers here, if your render function, let's back up a step. The component will re-render when its state changes via set state or replace state, when its parent re-renders and it gets new properties, or when you call force update. So the direct answer to your question is yes, you can call force update. However, if your render function is, as ideal, only implemented with this.props and this.state, then parents re-rendering or calling set state will be the only two times that you'll ever need render to be calling it.
For the contrived example, though, if we had done what Avery and I both tried to do at the beginning, which was this.state number of cookies plus plus,
And then
and then
this.force
force
update. Yeah.
this.force.
Yep. Yeah, I think that would work. React does do some batching of your set state calls in order, so if you just like force update everywhere, it's like having a bunch of, like the backbone style of a bunch of change events, and they're all mutating the DOM, and you end up with 100 DOM mutations in the same tick. So React will batch your set state calls, and at the end of the tick, be like, okay, now figure out everything that changed, and let's just do one pass on the DOM. So it's much more performant.
So I just did something stupid kind of on purpose just to see what happened. Inside render I called this.set state just to see what would happen. And it actually threw a warning or an error in the console. It's like, don't do that.
Yep.
Which is great.
The dev version of React is pretty good about telling you what you fucked up.
Yeah. It's super useful.
Where's that Dell flag live?
So it's different builds of React.
Okay.
So if you're like downloading React from somewhere, you would like the regular build or the .min.js build. This is using a custom build step, which checks the value of process.m.node_n equals production. So, like in schools for the production build, we just set that to true, or yeah, we set it equal to production, and then it automatically pulls out all those marks. Cool. All right, let's look at the last one. Kind of put together all the stuff we've been talking about. All right, Jason, you have to stop clicking cookies now.
No, on Ari's I can buy them through PayPal.
That was fast. How long until you get Faye and React's talking together?
You can buy a cookie. Buy one.
All right. So for example 5, we have.
Here's the answer. 100 cookies.
Moving on. In example 5, we have a form with a text box that we can type into and an add email button that appears to just refresh the page. So not insanely useful. So what we are going to do is take the Gravatar component that we built in, I think it was exercise 3, and we are going to expand it to allow the user to type in email addresses, click add email, and that Gravatar will be added to a growing list of Gravatars. Okay? So let's start on line 17 with get initial state. What state do we need to track here?
The Gravitas.
Or the emails.
Or emails, yeah, let's call it emails, because that's actually what we're going to have here.
We could have also kept track of the Gravatars themselves here, or could we not?
Good.
Like the actual,
Like the subcomponent.
actual
Gravatar.
objects.
The actual instances?
Yeah, that would be weird.
Off the top of my head, I'm not 100% sure if that would work or not. If it did, it would be something I would recommend not doing. You kind of want your states to be like JavaScript primitives, if at possible.
That's actually
But you can metaprogram React components in that, like you could set a variable to equal a React component
Yes.
or another
Yeah,
React
exactly. So
component.
like in here, we could say, we'll get into that very shortly.
Oh,
Actually.
okay.
So let's say instead of an empty set of email addresses, to test this out, let's start with a couple of email addresses. I'll put mine in here, and Jason's again, since we all know what he looks like. So, when we want a value for each value in an array, what tool do we usually drop into?
underscore
Well, what specifically?
for each.
Or map. So we're going to use map. I didn't pull an underscore in this particular example, but underscore is a fine choice. Instead, what we'll do is I'm going to throw another div in here just to kind of separate things. So map returns a JavaScript expression. You give it an array and a function to call for each array, and it returns an array of things that you return from the function. So for each of our state emails, let's map to some function. We'll call it render Gravatar. Makes sense so far?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And after render, don't forget your comma. We'll implement render Gravatar, and that will take one argument, which is the email from the array.
Now, part of me is worried that we're not binding the call map to this, but you're saying that hopefully that won't be an issue.
I am. Hopefully that will not be an issue.
Okay.
And actually, we're not going to access this anyway, so it won't matter.
Most of the time with DOM elements, you only have to
Yeah.
care about the email.
Sure. That makes sense for this case.
So to render a Gravatar with an email address, we've done this before, so let's just capital G Gravatar with the email equal to the JavaScript expression email, and don't forget to return it like I almost did. Once we got that in, hopefully,
Can you go back for a second?
yes, definitely.
So that semicolon at the end. Oh, you just didn't use the parentheses.
I just didn't use parentheses because it's such a short line, yeah. Does this make sense? The results make sense? My dog in Jason's mode.
Yep. So now the question is, do you handle the form submit or do you handle the input on click?
Great question, which I'll ask you in just a minute. But before we get there,
Trying to channel my the 90s. And what you do.
yes.
Marquee link.
If you look in your JavaScript console for our working exercise, you'll see a warning that says each child in the array should have a unique key property. Check the render method of application, and then a link to more information. Rather than making you read the link to more information, I'll talk about it now. So, React has a property on any component called key, and that property helps React keep track of the mapping between an element in the array and the component that goes with it. Anyone think of why?
To help it do the calculation of what things to update.
That's exactly right. So if your array changes order or changes length, there's not really a good way in JavaScript to be like, okay, well, you remove something from the middle of the array, so I'm going to remove this middle DOM element. Instead, React would have to naively just destroy all the elements and recreate them all. If you give it a key, it can say like, oh, the one with the key of whatever is gone, I can just remove that one. And so it'll be much faster. So as a general rule, anytime you have an array of elements via map or for each or something like that, you want to give it a key. You can use the index, but that kind of defeats the purpose. So generally it's a good idea to use some sort of value. In our case, we have a value, we'll just use the
That's not necessarily unique, though, right?
Yeah.
It is not, yeah, exactly. So in a real app, you might use the primary key of a record or something like that. In our case, we have no such record, so we'll just pretend like emails are unique.
But it does completely describe that component's output. So even if you had two gravatars with the same email and they got confused, it doesn't matter.
That would actually, so we'll see this in a minute when we finish the application. If you try to add a second email address, it will actually not work.
So it complains if there's key collisions.
Why doesn't it just use the index of the array by itself?
By default, it does. The warning is telling you that that's inefficient because the index is not enough information to figure out what's been removed. Because if you remove element 5, the one that was element 6 is now going to be index 5. And so React has no way of knowing that's the one that's gone.
Got it. And so if we were to remove something from the array, how would we tell React that happened? Would we do the same, like previously we did update state or whatever?
We'll get there shortly.
Right.
So the key is indexed separately from, like, in the virtual DOM, or like, could you make the key be like the index but toString to force it to be like, or like really if you gave it the index, shouldn't that be the key that it looks it up by if it's indexed separately from its actual place in the list?
It would, but in the updated array, if you have an array with 6 elements and I give you another array with 5 elements,
Oh, when it
how do you know
re-rendered.
which one was the one that was removed?
So it's an issue, right? I see. So the
Like
source
key 3 is still going to exist, it's just going to be a different element now. So everything from 3 down is going to be clobbered and re-rendered, rather than just removing the link.
that makes sense.
So when you're specifying that key, is that turning into the data React ID?
That is a piece of the data React ID. So the data React ID is basically a path into the tree, the virtual DOM. So it's like the 0th child of the root, the 0th child of that, the one with key, Brandon at BrandonDooley.com.
Yeah.
So you can actually see that this is .0, this is .0.0, this is .0.0 key.
When the equals 1 is because the dot means something.
Equals 1 is
Drilling
probably the
down.
dot, yeah.
If you open up the React tab for this,
Yeah.
it gives you 2 image things. Is there an explanation for that? Is one of them like the image, and the other like the non-image image? This makes sense in my mind.
Oops, I clicked on a thing, sorry. That actually looks kind of strange to me, but
It's the same
don't
thing inside itself.
know what that
Maybe a bug in the
is.
tool?
Could be a bug in the dev tools. This might be a side effect of, so 0.12, which is the version we're using here, is kind of an in-between of 0.11, 0.13, where 0.13 is going to officially remove a bunch of APIs. They're deprecated in 0.12. So this could be a side effect of that. I'll look into this.
I don't see that.
You don't see that?
I just see 2 flat images next to each other.
But in the React tools.
Ah.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
The React tools have been a little bit flaky for me since the last version. I think maybe they're not perfect. This is something worth mentioning, though. we've got a Gravatar instance here. So the nice thing about the React tool is it allows us to see the structure of our application in the terms that we use. So instead of just seeing an image, we actually see the Gravatar composite component. So if we change this to David, modify user email.
Oh, go for it.
If we change that,
Oh wow.
it automatically sets the state for you, and your application re-renders. So this is really powerful in a more complex application where you have state that trickles down through your tree fairly deeply. You can change that in one place and just watch your application update. Which is really cool.
That is cool.
Yeah. Without writing any state mutation like
That
DOM
might have
mutation
just like
stuff.
sold me.
It's also worth noting that, like, if you think about doing this in Marionette with like separate collection views and all of that stuff, all the 4 files you'd have to set up to make this happen, it's like fantastic.
Right, yeah, so you could totally do this kind of style in Marionette, but it would be a lot of model binding, it would be a lot of instantiating subclasses and passing them as children. JSX makes it really easy to just nest it just like you do HTML. So, for what it's worth, if anyone is still not 100% sold on JSX, it took me a while. I like it a lot now, but as a matter of fact, I actually dismissed React when I first heard of it because I saw the JSX and I'm like, well, that's fucking stupid. So I just ignored it until someone I respected said, no, you should give it another look, and I did. So give it some time. It'll grow on you. So, should we handle the on-click on the button, or should we handle the on-submit of the form?
Form.
Why is that?
So when you hit enter, it's still.
Because you wouldn't have put the form there unless it was part of the demo.
Both good answers.
Using the test to take the test.
Exactly.
I feel like you should both get points for that. So let's add an on-submit here. Like before, we will handle we'll pass it a function reference. We'll call it maybe handle submit or whatever you would like. I'm going to put it right here. Take the event as a property just so we can kind of keep it all on one screen. So what's the first thing we do when we handle the form submit event in a single page app?
Prevent default.
Prevent
Oh
default.
man, prevent that default. No one wants that default.
Everyone's got their stars.
Yeah, exactly. This is a problem familiar to people in this room. So we can already see if we refresh the page and we start typing in the box and we click, we've got something. We're preventing the default. We're not making the page go away. But we need to handle the value of the input. So this is a little bit hard to explain, so bear with me for just a second. So the point of React is to have a render function that defines what your DOM should look like at any point in time. Okay? So as an experiment, let's take our top input, the one with type text, and let's give it a value of whatever you want.
Which you would think is like the initial value.
You have very good self-esteem, Amber. Right. So now, once you've done that, hop over to the form and change what's in the box to something else. You can't. Why can't you? Does anyone know why you can't?
You told it not to.
Exactly. You told it not to.
When did we do that?
With the value.
What's that?
You said render is always
Yes.
render something.
We describe our DOM at any point in time as this input having the value of the word something. This is called a controlled input. And it's part of the React idea that your DOM should always be reflected by your render method. The reason it's powerful is that this can be a JavaScript expression just like anything else. So I'll just wrap this in curly braces, JavaScript expression. And you can see that if we... Sorry, what's up? Math.random, yeah. If you go into your form and you see your act input, you see that's passed as a property. So just like any other property, we can change it and our application will automatically re-render. So we can control the values of our form inputs by hooking them up to JavaScript variables either in our state or our properties coming from elsewhere in the app. However, it does make inputs just a little bit useless because you can change what's in there. So when you want to handle a change on an input, any guesses? Oh my gosh, you guys are on top of it.
Very weird bug in the bug tools here.
You missed your.
Yeah.
Check this out. Have you seen this before?
Oh, weird. Yeah. A little flaky.
I report about
What? Oh god.
Sorry, we can't listen.
You know, I even did this in one of my run-throughs the other day. All right, so we've got an on-change event. I've called it handle text change. You can call it whatever you want. Let's define handle text change. We get our event. What do you think we should do in our event handler?
Change the props or the state.
Perfect. All right, so you both got it. The target of the event, just like regular events, is in event.target. We can get the new value via dot value, just like usual. So I'll assign this to a variable called text. But then we need to do something with that text. Gene was right. We need to update some state, which means we need to do a couple of things. The first one is we need to have some state, right?
We do have some state, right?
Well, we got some emails, but we also want our currently inputted email to be a state.
Right.
Because we want to be able to change it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Anything
yeah,
that you want to be
yeah,
able to
yeah,
change
yeah.
in React component ends up as state. So let's add another key to our getInitialState object called whatever you want, current text, current email.
So current email is the stuff that's
Yep.
in the box.
In the box. And to make it in the box, let's go to our hard-coded value of something, or whatever you call it. And let's change that to
Yes,
Stuff props. No, state.
Just not
ah,
Current email.
current text, or whatever you call it. Finally, in our change handler, we already learned how to update state. Just that, exactly. I want whatever we called it, current text, to read the text.
And that
There's a
won't
typo.
blow away the email.
You're missing a T.
What's that?
That won't blow away the emails. The other
So,
key.
yes, good question. Set state takes a list of keys to overwrite. Any keys that already exist will be left alone. Replace state is a function that will just completely obliterate your state with whatever you pass in.
That's
So, given these changes, we can refresh and we can type whatever we want. This pattern is powerful because of the reasons we talked about already. However, it is a little bit verbose. It's worth noting that React has an add-on called a linked state mixin that makes this easier to manage. We won't go into that. Feel free to look it up after the thing. So we now have our currently typed in email address and our state.currentText. So moving back to our form handler, what should we do?
Use the state.
How so?
Set state. Set state. Paren. Emails this.state.emails plus this.state.current email.
Yeah, so in JavaScript we get to use concat.
Yeah, sorry, not plus.
That's fine.
I was wondering why I
So
wasn't doing
concat takes another array and puts them together. So remember, we don't want to mutate state. We generally don't want to just push something onto the array, so we'll use concat,
Which is probably why Facebook developed Immutable.
which is why there's some helper libraries that we can talk about that help with some of these patterns. Okay.
Do we also want to clear out current text?
Ah, good call. Good call.
Does order matter here?
Order does not matter. Order does not matter. So one thing I mentioned earlier is that set state, React will batch your set state calls, which means that this is actually an asynchronous function. So you cannot guarantee, so this statement is false at this point on line 51. At this point, this.state to current text will most likely still be what you call it. Set state does take a callback if you want to know when the state is changed. Most of the time you don't, because you're building very declarative UIs and you really don't need to know when something changed. So,
Just call render.
right. So, given that change, if we go back and add, there we go. Is everyone caught up so far?
Yeah.
Any questions on this much? There's one more thing I'd like to cover before we finish up.
And if you wanted to focus, if you wanted to like focus that element, would you just do it in the DOM in this handler? Is that the appropriate place to do a focus?
If you wanted to focus
The DOM or the input box after clearing it out
After
for new
clearing
input.
it?
It's like the common pattern of like input,
Gotcha.
hit enter,
yeah.
or is that more of a render thing or is it a lifecycle?
So focus is a declarative API. So sometimes an imperative API. Sometimes you do need to like stop being so declarative and say like, okay, well after you press enter, I want to focus. In that case, event.target is the DOM node that you're looking at, and you could just call focus.
Cool. And you would do that here while you're setting the state, as opposed to in a lifecycle event after the render.
Good question. So there's a couple ways you could handle it, depending on how your application behaved. There are React event or lifecycle hooks that run right after render is, like right before and right after render is called. So if you're like every time anything in your component changes, you want to focus the text box, you could do it there. But if you only wanted it to happen like when you submitted the form, you would do it in that function that handles the form submit.
So it is okay to manipulate the virtual DOM in a virtual event.
You'll
And-
generally not manipulate the DOM, but you'll often call, because like focusing an input doesn't really manipulate the DOM, so you wouldn't like add a class or you wouldn't want to
I
remove a
see.
DOM element or something
Right.
like that, but it's okay to like call APIs on it.
Makes sense.
And there will be situations like, the assessment tool as a video player, very, very imperative API, play, pause, set current time, all that kind of stuff. So the best way to handle that kind of stuff is like build a component that wraps all that API and then pretend it doesn't exist.
Cool.
Ooh. I figured something out.
Awesome.
I tried to add Brandon Tilley, Brandon at BrandonTilley.com, and it didn't work. And then I changed how I generate the key, so it's unique.
Perfect. How did you change your key generation?
I added a random, not that random to you.
Gotcha. Interesting to note, if it's random every time it maps, then you'll actually be back in the state you were in the beginning where you didn't have a key, because they'll be different every render, and so React will tear down and recreate all those elements.
Oh, because it works by like rendering it once, then it'll render the whole thing again.
And see what changed. You're like, oh man, none of these things are the same, so
Everything's
it'll
different.
destroy all
And
of
one
them.
way,
and recreate.
one way to tell if that's happening is with your inspect element console to go into the non-React tool and like put your mouse on a particular DOM element, and then try to put something in that email. If that element gets wiped, then it will lose focus from the tab. If it gets kept, the focus will stay.
And sometimes it's not a big deal. There are definitely instances in, say, like the assessment tool where I use the index as a key just to make the warning go away, because there's 10 elements and I'm not really that worried about the performance hit from tearing down those elements. But when you're dealing with a very large app, if you looked at my React primary repo, there's an example where you have 2,000 elements and it's much slower without that sort of movement.
So if we have the console open and we want to actually introspect or fiddle with the objects that we have here, is there a way to get to these high-level or top-level things from the console? Does everyone understand the question?
If you want to call a method on a component.
Yeah. Like how can I play with a component from the console?
So generally, the two things that will change a component will be your state and props, which you can get to from the dev tools. If there are other things, then you'll use a lifecycle hook and assign it to a variable in window, like window.whatever equals this, and then mess around with it there. But I found that to be relatively rare.
So you're saying don't use the console, use the React console, and then
Right, yeah, you'll use the, over here, if I look at the application, I can see here are all my current emails. If I change this to, you can update that.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I specifically asked is because you can't actually add a new email to this
Yeah,
array from the
exactly.
console.
This is something I actually started looking into the DevTools to see if it was easy to add support for. The answer is, how to do that.
What is the question? To add another
so
email
like,
from the
there's not a good way to be like, okay, I want to add, like, you can't hit tab and get another entry. If you hit enter, it goes away. So there's no way to like add a fourth thing. And
It's
this
like
is
a-
just a limitation of this object is forward built differently. So. All right, so let's move around very quickly. I don't want to last too much longer, but there is one more thing I want to handle. or cover. Let us say that we wanted to handle a case where when we clicked on Jason, we got his mug out of the way. So, how would you guys guess that we would do so?
We would probably put an on-click handler to start with on the Gravatar thing.
Perfect. Let's try that.
Maybe on the div or on the Gravatar.
Let's throw it on the Gravatar.
Sorry, I briefly zoned out. What are we trying to accomplish?
When we click on a Gravatar, we want to remove it from the list. Okay. So let's add a non-click handler. Let's call it remove email. I'm going to implement remove email. Sorry. So this is going to be a little bit. Sorry, bear with me here. So let's start with this. An on-click of just this.remove email. And then in remove email, let's just console log something happened. That makes sense? Sorry, I kind of jumped around there. Okay. And then if we refresh and look in our console and click on Jason, absolutely nothing happens. And the reason this is because Gravatar is a composite component. It doesn't represent a DOM element. It can't receive clicks. It might be made up of many DOM elements. How do you kind of resolve that? So, the lesson here is only concrete HTML components can have click handlers. So, that means that we would want to put...
So if we had done this on the div, we would not have had this problem.
Right, but the div has all of the avatars in it. So we'd have to find a way to figure out which...
You're right.
which
But if we
Gravatar
put
it is.
another div around the Gravatar or something, if we
yeah.
put the real element.
Right,
You put it
so
on
you
the
do that.
image tag.
How does it work? Like, because you put it on the individual thing.
Yeah, what if we put it on the
Right,
image
so we
tag
Yeah, the
up
image
here?
is also
It's
Gravatar.
on
Yep,
application,
perfect.
right?
It's Avery's right on the money. So let's put it on the image tag. So we're inside the Gravatar component now. We have a click handler called handleClick. And we want to do something. But what is it that we want to do? Well, we don't want to hard code the click handler to remove a Gravatar, because maybe we don't want to remove a Gravatar when we click it. Maybe we want to make it twice as big because we really like seeing Jason's face.
Could we maybe somehow trigger
I call it
something?
but you're passing up.
You're on the right
Can
path.
you pass in the handler as a prop?
Bam.
So would this be a thing you'd add up here then?
Yeah, he's got it exactly. So let's define remove email as a function that takes email. And then I'm very quickly going to write this stupid code because JavaScript. So we have an index which is equal to this.state.emails.index of email. If the index is greater than -1. Sorry, we also need to make a copy of our emails. Sometimes I do JavaScript. I should have pulled in underscore for this, but all right. So index is our index of the email. Emails is a copy of our list. If the index is greater than -1, then we want to slice one item out of emails. Finally, we want to set our emails to the new emails. So all that makes sense.
But where do we get email from?
Where do we play from? So we've defined an onClick property for Gravatar, but we've already discovered that that doesn't actually do anything. But what this does do is, just like any other property, is made available, just like Gene said, to the Gravatar. So we can say we can get access to it via this.props.onClick. Right? And since we know this click handler is supposed to take the email, we'll pass in this.props.email.
Could we do this a different way?
What's that?
And let the application actually handle the synthetic event by passing in on the render line 12 this.props.onClick?
You definitely could. The only reason we wouldn't want to in this case is because we'd have no way of knowing what the email is. So the click handler by default receives the event, but the event doesn't have any information about the email we actually want to remove.
Not something fancy by a target and. You know.
We could probably do that. Yeah, we could probably put something on the DOM or some other way. Yeah.
So is this supposed to work?
Good question. Does it work? It does.
Okay, so then I'm missing something. I'm entirely sure.
So our image has an onclick. The function calls this.props.onclick and passes in the email.
Yep.
And the remove email, which is what we pass into onclick.
Oh, I missed that statement.
Your remove email takes emails as an argument, but how does the Gravatar component know what the signature is? I mean, we wrote it in there, but
Yes.
how would you know?
Yeah, it's a good question. Because JavaScript, it's not easy to. So let's take a step back. We have a new prop that we want to make a guarantee about.
Okay.
So now we take an onclick. And we want to say this is going to be a prop type of a function. There's not really a good way to tell React what you want the arguments to be. When they come out with their static type analysis tool later this year, this will probably become better. For right now, there's not a great way to do it. I've been doing something like that.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Now, go ahead.
what does line 18? I'm not understanding why that.
How this works.
Yeah.
So this.props refers to the things that were passed to as prop.
Oh, I think I understand.
The
I
prop,
understand
the
that.
prop name onclick is a reference to some function that somebody gave us.
Got it.
We don't know what it is, but it's a function we can still call it.
When we returned the Gravatar object, we gave it a onclick function.
Exactly.
So you could just pass this by itself, and then you'd have more power to get to the state or anything else.
Yeah, you could definitely do that. Some of that is API design, like how much
Yeah.
do you want parents to know about the props that got passed in, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
That is like a whole other thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah.
The parent is the only one responsible for setting what props is, so it should know it's true.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Right.
But do you see this often, where you will call a handler that the parent passed in with a subset of props for state?
Yeah, quite often. What you'll see a lot of times is something more like, okay, I've got this function called remove email. It takes an email. I need to pass that around to multiple places, or maybe I'll pass it to a child, which gives it to one of its children, or it goes to multiple child components. And I can change this one implementation, so I own this state of this list of emails. None of these very reusable components need to know what it means to remove an email. They just know that, like, the only thing that a parent might care about is which email they have.
It seems like there's this notion of composition of components, which was very clean until we had to deal with this fact that state is kind of spread between the components. It would be really nice if there were a way to take this concern of changing the state and
Centralize it
pull it
somewhere.
out somewhere.
Yeah, if only there was like a talk next week on something like that. So
Whole plants.
I swear to God, I didn't say anyone to say any of these things. So does this make sense, what we did? We passed it a function reference as a property, we then called that function. I understand this is a little bit of a contrived example because it's relatively simple, but the basic principle is that child components, especially reusable ones, should know about the data they contain or the logic on what to do with it. You'll generally pass callbacks to children who will call those callbacks to communicate back up to the parent.
Those are the triggers that
Yes. One thing to mention is that we are calling this.props.onclick no matter what, even if we didn't pass it, and we did not mark this function as required. So just as a note, there's a lifecycle hook called get initial props, which works just like get initial state. And we can say that we want onclick by default to be a blank function. Problem solved.
I gotta run. I'm really sorry.
Yep, no, that's
Thank
problem.
you.
This is it. That's it.
Thank
Cool.
you very much.
Thanks.
This
was
is
awesome.
Good job, Teddy.
Anyone have any questions before we finish up?
Nice use of active learning.
Yeah, that was really good.
either next week or sometime shortly after, I want to talk a little bit more about the assessment tool in particular and some of the architectural patterns that kind of build on the stuff that we talked about here, that Jason so definitely hinted at. I'm going to send around an idea for an exercise. It's optional. It's designed to kind of practice what we learned here today. It's to build a to-do app. There's a place in the code for you to build it out. If you want to work on it together as a group, that's fine. If you want to work on it solo, that's fine. But I'll send that out shortly.
What is this assignment do?
I really do, but if you want to make sure you've got those concepts down before we dive into some more complex stuff next week.
So you
I would
are
say
doing
that.
this.
I'm not sure if we're going to do it next week, so I'm out of town the end of this week, so I don't know if I'll be quite prepared, so I might move that back a week or so.
That might be good too. People
Give people
more
time to see that, yeah.
I certainly haven't looked at the React primer, so
Gotcha.
selfishly I haven't.
One other thing, by the way, is it's not just going to be for the assessment tool. I'm experimenting right now. Well, I know you already added some React stuff to school, right? And I'm experimenting with using some of React on the dashboard as well, because it makes a lot of the new features that we need to build a lot easier and faster to build with like just some of the collection manipulation that we need. So I'm trying to follow all of Tilly's patterns from the assessment tool, so you only have to learn it once with all of the stuff that we're talking about. And we can talk if there's anything I should do differently that's there. But
How
just
does
know
React
that
play with Marionette?
this is a complex topic. Tilly and I have talked over this whole. Basically, what I'm doing to avoid that issue, you can put React inside of Marionette, but the problem is how do you get all of those change events to fire appropriately to re-render the subcomponents? You can totally render a React element inside of a Marionette view, not a problem, but it's more a question of how does the data flow through that view.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing so far is just making a separate namespace where you can redirect to, so you can hop back and forth between the two. And I'm doing faculty only stuff at the beginning. Just as
Namespace like
yeah, like /dashboard instead of /courses or whatever. Just so FYI, it's not, even if you're like, I'm not going to work on the assessment tools, there are other places that
Where
this
did you
will
put it in
stuff up.
schools?
So I did a prototype of a little site called Students of the World,
Oh, yeah.
where there was some React in there, and the new scholarship picker that's built with React. That would probably be a good example of a smaller, more contained, non-flexy component.
Right. The nice thing about schools is there's no real JavaScript framework in there already.
Right.
So.
So React is often used to build big single-page apps, but it's also quite good at building like little individual components, and you can render them in certain places.
Like how does React play with Django templating? I mean, it should be fine.
Yeah, it
Templating
should.
just like gives you some initial state.
Yep, yep. And a lot of times what you'll do is very, you see React.render and you have application, you'll have some property that passes in all your initial state.
Is there a location API kind of stuff for React?
So React is really just a view layer, so none of that stuff is built in. There's a great project which I believe David has been experimenting with on the dashboard called React Router, which is based off the Ember router, and it is really fantastic. It's really quite good.
I also just wanted to mention that if you go to Facebook and you go to the React
Oh, yeah.
in the console,
I'll send you guys a little snippet you can run on the console that will
very
highlight all the React-based stuff in red, and it's like kind of interspaced throughout Facebook, and you go to Instagram and like the whole page turns red because they do their entire rendering for React. So it's kind of interesting to see.
yeah,
That's cool. One thing that you should mention really briefly is just like animations, because when you think about functional re-rendering all the time, you think, oh, I can't have animations anymore.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. So React kind of borrowed the Angular style animation stuff, if you're familiar with that. Basically, it's a declarative way, mostly through CSS, of saying how you want elements to animate in and out. It's definitely doable. It's just didn't cover today. Cool. Thanks, guys. If
Yeah,
you
really
appreciate it.
awesome.
If you have any
Thanks.
questions, feel free to hit us up. I think Jason's got quite a bit of experience. David, obviously. So if you have any questions, let us know. Thanks, guys.
Nice
So
job.